Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics. In order to keep with social distancing, this week TJ is over FaceTime and she's got some questions for us. So, TJ.
Hi, Dale. Nice to talk with you. Good job, I think, on our vlogging here, social style. So, my question today is about borders. And more specifically, we've seen a lot of stuff in the press about the US-Canada border is closed, it's not closed, what's happening, then the mutual agreement to only have goods, services, and essential travel back and forth. And now today, the headlines are being hit with some information about asylum seekers coming through with the borders. So I'd love it if you just unpack a bit some of the news that is happening around the borders and maybe dispel some of the confusion. Like, what is the actual situation with the US? What does it look like with a normal day with the US-Canada situation? And what's going to happen to asylum seekers?
Okay, that's a lot. So we'll try and do this. On a normal day, we do about $1.9 billion of trade across the Canada-US border every day. And there are places in the country, particularly around, say, Detroit and Windsor, where there are people who commute basically across the border on a daily basis. They either live on one side and work on the other, or the other way around. And in Quebec, there are some border towns which are literally on the border. So there are a number of places for which it's tremendously integrated. And so it's going to be a bit difficult in order to try and really enforce this non-essential travel order, I guess. There seems to be some questions. I mean, that's part of the reason why when we closed airspace borders, why the Canada-US border couldn't be done in the same way either. I mean, it's a very complex and integrated system, and we couldn't just do unilaterally closing it, and neither could the Americans. Which is probably a good thing, particularly considering that, our integrated border is partially what's kept peace between us for so long. So that's part of what the difficulty there is. It's the other, I guess, aspect of this is that we have supply chains that are integrated, and the saying, which I think has some veracity, but I'm not 100%, is that a car will travel back and forth across the border about 8 times before it's a finished product. Just given how the assembly and supply chains work. So that kind of gives you an idea as to really how closely we need to kind of have this relationship at the border. So I think that kind of gives you a picture. We're still trying to figure out all of the nuances around this non-essential travel ban, because there are people for whom they go and do their shopping on one side of the border or the other on a regular basis. Is that going to be considered essential? They're basically saying that's not considered essential, but it's also going to be a certain amount of judgment call by border officials. So that could be very interesting over the coming weeks.
That is really interesting, especially because, the time I've spent in other countries near borders, that is very common, for example, or was until, this month, in the EU, for example, people living in France, Italy, and Germany, and commuting back and forth to Switzerland, Swiss people going across to get their meat and their wine that's cheaper. And again, I think it's very interesting what you brought up, this definition of essential, because we are entering a brave new world of vocabulary here.
Yeah, no, for sure, and that's something I think it's gonna kind of work itself out. But I think some people are going to find themselves mightily inconvenienced in the meantime. And then you were also asking about the asylum seeker thing, and that's also very recent news and very sudden. Um, and there's a couple of different aspects to this. Um, I If there's a cynical part of me that thinks that this may have partially been a bone to the opposition because they've been very cooperative on a lot of things, but they've been very vocal about this particular issue over the past few weeks. So there may have been a little quid pro quo with that. Um, and also, it's been kind of cited by some of the reporters in Washington that Trudeau basically did a favor for Trump in closing the border in the way he did with the Safe Third Country Agreement, because that allows Trump to turn away people on the southern border in the same way that Canada can turn them away on the northern border. So there's some politics being played there.
That is interesting. I was going to actually ask about. I haven't really, and I don't know if it's just because I'm suffering from COVID-19 news overwhelm and I missed it somewhere, but I haven't really seen any other sort of G7 countries or large statements about asylum seekers as a particular subset. I feel like Canada might be one of the first countries to, maybe they're not the first country to address it, but one of the first countries to amplify it through the media, that we have a policy on this. And in terms of precedence, exactly what you're saying, that it then sets the stage. If Canada is doing it, given its very, to be frank, moral sort of status in the world,
Mm-hmm.
what is the ripple down, ripple out, ripple up effect then for other countries?
And that's going to be a live question. There's a 30-day sunset clause in this particular agreement. So if things kind of start going back to normal in 30 days, there's every possibility that the governments will let it just die and kind of return to status quo. And on the other hand, the opposition will at that point say, well, if you did it for those 30 days, why can't you keep doing it? There are a lot of considerations, humanitarian ones in particular. Canada has international obligations. And the Safe Third Country Agreement is a bit iffy, particularly considering some of the stuff going on with asylum claimants in the U.S. And the one thing I would say about the move doing it now that I think is a little problematic, we'll use that word, is the fact that this is more likely to just push these asylum seekers into further and further afield border crossings, which will have less monitoring than the kind of semi-controlled ones that they've been using, particularly Roxham Road. And I think that will be a bigger problem because then we have no way of public health enforcement.
That's very interesting, especially consider the weather is changing, because my sense is that illegal attempts through the U.S.-Canada border die down specifically in the winter because so many of these places are actually impassable in the winter. You've got sort of the frozen barrier there, snow, woods, and darkness.
There was that famous story of the two guys who were they were from Africa and they lost their fingers because of frostbite in attempting to cross the Winnipeg border. So at least with Roxham Road, we had a fairly controlled way of managing this, and we could get them processed in an orderly fashion. By closing that avenue, and more especially right now that once they're processed, they're going into 14-day isolation.
Exactly. I was going to ask actually because
and even yesterday, yesterday from the day we're filming this, so that would have been Thursday last week. For when the rest of you get to watch this video. The federal government had announced that they were placing these people in federal facilities rather than provincial ones. So in order to ensure that they had proper isolation for those 14 days. That is not going to happen now, and so I think that's going to be one of the kind of unintended consequences of this is we will have people who could potentially be carriers who are going to find even more remote crossings and then kind of entering into the population that way. And I think that could have a bigger unintended consequence in the future. And we'll have to see how that kind of plays itself out.
Well, I was going to say, I don't know if I'm assuming we don't have anything specific like ICE in Canada, because in the U.S. we've been seeing stories of the immigration enforcement agencies arresting people at hospitals when they bring their children in. And obviously in the U.S. we have a very extreme situation with everything is more intense on both sides of the fence, I guess, and the border. But it's something that I'm curious about when you mentioned provincial versus federal here. What kind of enforcement agencies how are enforcement agencies to be organized about this? If an illegal attempted crossing is made, does that automatically become federal, or what?
Yeah. Because immigration and refugee matters are federal, any removals are done by CBSA. But what happens is refugees, once they make claims, essentially go into the provincial public welfare system. So that's kind of where and so the provinces end up being in charge of housing them and providing health care. And that's kind of what that delineation is.
Okay. And is there a function in Canada that protects people from, in the U.S. we have a few states and cities that are sort of called sanctuary, right? Where you can't be arrested in a courtroom if you are testifying in a trial, for example, because you don't want people who have witnessed a crime to not testify just because of their immigration status. Or,
right.
We, in some places in the U.S., we have laws against, immigration enforcement agency officials coming into emergency rooms and just going through everybody's IDs. So what is the public health meets immigration balance in Canada?
We don't have the same kind of aggressive enforcement the way that the U.S. does, so I don't know if it plays out in the same way. I mean, we've had a couple of cities declare themselves sanctuary cities, but I don't think that has anywhere near the same kind of meaning that it does in the U.S. So I think it's more for the sake of, I guess I would say just kind of a performative aspect than anything, but that's kind of what it is.
That's interesting. So I guess the ideological side is going to be put under practical testing now that, as you were saying, if the very real possibility that the unintended consequences is that you do have people coming in who are not registered anywhere, and the public health crisis in combination, it'll be interesting to see how systems either evolve or have to be created to address that whole demographic.
Right. But part of the thing is that they need to be able to make a claim in order to get any assistance. So how they're going to make that claim is really going to be the issue.
Okay. Yes. So many layers of procedure to unpack in the next few days and weeks and months, Dale. This is very interesting.
All right.
Well, thank you for answering my questions and sparking a few dozen others. I will be back to bother you again.
Okay. Thanks. And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. That's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.